At 4:45 in the morning, in a harbor on the Baltic Sea, a battleship opened fire. The shell hit before anyone on shore could fully understand what was happening. The concussion rolled across the water. Then another. Then another. 210 Polish soldiers inside a fortified depot on a thin strip of land called Westerplatte heard the impacts and reached for their weapons. Their commanding officer, Major Henryk Sucharski, found a radio. He transmitted 2 words and a number. SOS, under fire. It was September 1st, 1939. The war that would kill 50 million people had begun, but the battleship was not where it started. The story starts 19 minutes earlier and 140 kilometers to the south, at a railway bridge over the Vistula River. The world that produced that morning had been building for 20 years. It had been assembled, piece by careful piece, at a conference in Paris in 1919 by men who believed they were building a lasting peace and instead designed a slow catastrophe. When World War I ended in November 1918, the victorious Allied powers gathered to redraw the map of Europe. The Treaty of Versailles, signed on June 28, 1919, stripped Germany of 13% of its territory, 17% of its agricultural land, and 10% of its population. It forced Germany to accept full legal responsibility for the war. It demanded reparations that would compress the German economy for a generation. It was designed to punish. It succeeded. One of its most consequential decisions was a strip of land. The Polish corridor, carved from German territory to give the newly restored nation of Poland access to the Baltic Sea, ran approximately 35 kilometers wide and 100 kilometers long, cutting directly through what had been German Pomerania. The corridor severed East Prussia from the rest of Germany entirely. On a map, Germany now looked like a country with a piece missing from its side. At the eastern end of the corridor sat Danzig, a port city of 400,000 people, 95% of them German-speaking. Centuries of German commercial and cultural history embedded in its streets. Rather than award it to Poland or return it to Germany, the treaty made it a free city, nominally independent, administered by the League of Nations, with its foreign affairs managed by Warsaw. Germany lost Danzig, and Germany never accepted it. For 20 years, the corridor and Danzig sat at the center of German politics, like a splinter that could not be removed. Every nationalist politician pointed at the map. Every military planner studied it. Every ordinary German who remembered what the country had looked like before 1919 looked at that thin strip of foreign territory cutting their country in two and understood, at a visceral level, that it had been done to humiliate them. That understanding was a weapon waiting to be picked up. Adolf Hitler came to power in January 1933. He inherited the wound and made a decision. He would use it. He understood that Germany had to be rebuilt before it could act, and that the Western powers had to be tested before they could be broken. His strategy was sequenced. In 1936, he remilitarized the Rhineland, marching soldiers into a zone that the Versailles Treaty had stripped of German military presence. France and Britain protested. Nobody moved. In March 1938, he annexed Austria. France and Britain protested. Nobody moved. In October 1938, after the Munich Agreement handed him the Sudetenland of Czechoslovakia, a democratic country whose allies had just handed it to a dictator to preserve what they called peace, British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain flew home to London and told a waiting crowd he had secured peace for our time. 6 months later, in March 1939, German forces crossed into the rest of Czechoslovakia, a country Hitler had promised to leave alone, a country Britain and France had dismantled their credibility to protect. The policy of appeasement collapsed in a single morning. Chamberlain was humiliated. London and Paris made a decision, the kind of decision that comes after humiliation, which is usually a decision that arrives too late. On March 31, 1939, Britain formally guaranteed Poland's territorial integrity. If Germany moved against Poland, Britain would go to war. Hitler was not deterred. His foreign minister, Joachim von Ribbentrop, had been demanding since October 1938 that Poland return Danzig to Germany and permit the construction of an extraterritorial German road and railway line running across the Polish corridor, connecting East Prussia to the rest of the Reich. Poland's foreign minister Josef Beck rejected every demand. Poland had watched what happened to Czechoslovakia after it made concessions. Poland was not going to make the same mistake. In private, Hitler told his senior generals in May 1939 something that clarified everything. Danzig, he said, was not the real objective. The real objective was Lebensraum, living space in the east, agricultural land, resources, territory. Poland was simply the first step. Danzig was the excuse. He had used it as a grievance to manufacture a crisis, and he was prepared to use the crisis to begin a war, and he believed that Britain and France, having watched him move 4 times without consequence, would not fight. On April 28, 1939, he publicly tore up the German-Polish Non-Aggression Pact, The diplomatic architecture was being demolished. The military planning was already done. Germany's invasion plan for Poland, codenamed Fall Weiss, Case White, had been approved by Hitler on April 3, 1939. 3 army groups would strike simultaneously. In the south, Army Group South would drive through Silesia toward Warsaw. In the north, Army Group North under General Fedor von Bock would execute a pincer. 4th Army pushing south from Pomerania in the west. 3rd Army striking west from East Prussia in the east, the 2 forces closing around the Polish corridor and crushing it. The problem was the gap. Between 4th Army in Pomerania and 3rd Army in East Prussia sat the Polish corridor, 35 kilometers of Polish territory, the Vistula River, and 1 bridge. The Dirschau Bridge, known in Polish as the Treaty Bridge, was 837 meters long. It crossed the lower Vistula at the town of Tycho, approximately 40 kilometers south of Danzig. It was a double-span railway and road bridge, the critical link between the 2 separated halves of Germany's northern attack. Without it, 4th Army would have to divert south and fight its way across the river by other means, slowing the northern offensive by days. With it, the pincer could close rapidly. The German military described it in their own planning documents as the most important single point in the entire northern theater of operations. And Poland knew. As early as 1938, Poland had begun reinforcing the bridge with machine gun positions and barbed wire. In August 1939, the Polish government quietly ordered demolition charges fitted to every major bridge across the Vistula. The Dirschau Bridge was wired to blow. A garrison of soldiers was stationed there with one primary function. If the Germans came, destroy it before they could take it. Germany's planners knew this. They devised a solution of extraordinary audacity. They would not send an army to take the bridge. They would send a train. The operation exploited a fact of routine bureaucracy. Under the arrangements governing the Polish corridor, German freight trains crossed Polish territory every day under Polish supervision. At the border, Polish workers would uncouple the German locomotive, attach a Polish one, and shepherd the train through. It happened so regularly that nobody questioned it. It was paperwork. It was procedure. It was invisible. The plan was precise. A scheduled German freight train of 65 wagons would cross from East Prussia into Poland at 3 in the morning on September 1st. 2 hours before the official start of the invasion. Hidden inside the wagons would be soldiers from a specially assembled assault force called Gruppe Medem, commanded by Colonel Medem. When the train reached the bridge, the soldiers would burst out of the wagons, overpower the garrison, seize the demolition controls, and hold the bridge until the main invasion force arrived. Behind the freight train, following at distance, would be an armored train with additional firepower. At 4:26 in the morning, 19 minutes before the official opening of hostilities, 3 Junkers Ju-87 Stuka dive bombers would attack Polish military installations near the bridge to prevent any reinforcement. The timing had to be exact. The garrison had to be taken before anyone could reach the detonator. Everything depended on surprise. Everything depended on the train arriving on schedule. At 3:08 in the morning on September 1st, 1939, the German freight train crossed the border from East Prussia into Poland. At Marienburg Station, the Polish locomotive arrived as scheduled to take over. The Polish railway workers were overpowered, killed, becoming the first human casualties of a war that had not yet officially started. German personnel dressed in Polish uniforms took their places at the controls. The train continued south toward the bridge. Then the plan began to unravel. At Simonsdorf Station, Polish railway officials routed the following armored train into a siding. A routine decision. They were clearing the main line. The shunting took time. The armored train fell behind schedule and could not catch up. The freight train was now advancing alone, without its fire support. And then, somewhere on the line between Marienburg and Tychow, a Polish officer looked at the transit papers for the freight train and something did not add up. He stopped the train. He examined the cargo documents. He asked questions. He was suspicious, whether from instinct or from some detail out of place, or from the simple fact that 65 wagons crossing at 3 in the morning felt wrong. And he was not the kind of officer who let suspicion go uninvestigated. He delayed the train for 15 minutes while he checked. 15 minutes. The warning had already been spreading through the network. Somewhere down the line, a Polish official had fired a flare, the signal to the bridge garrison that something was wrong, that a threat was approaching. By the time the German freight train finally reached the Dirschau Bridge at 4:26 in the morning, an iron gate had been swung across the tracks. The train stopped. The soldiers inside could not advance. The Polish garrison was already in position, rifles raised, fingers near the controls. At 4:26, the Stuka dive bombers arrived and began attacking the barracks and power station near the bridge. The armored train was still trapped in the siding at Simonsdorf, unable to provide covering fire. The German soldiers clambered out of the freight wagons in the dark, 100 meters short of the bridge, and tried to rush the iron gate on foot. The Polish defenders cut them down. 19 minutes passed. The operation was failing in real time. At 4:45 in the morning, the battleship Schleswig-Holstein opened fire on Westerplatte in Danzig harbor, the officially designated beginning of World War II. 4 minutes after that, the Polish engineers pressed the detonator. The charges fired. The Dirschau Bridge buckled, collapsed, and fell into the Vistula River. The most important structure in Germany's entire northern invasion plan was gone. The first military operation of the war, the operation that was supposed to guarantee the rapid advance of Army Group North, had failed completely. The Schleswig-Holstein was 30 years old in September 1939. A pre-dreadnought battleship that had fought at the Battle of Jutland in World War I, reclassified as a training vessel, technically obsolete. It had sailed into Danzig harbor on August 25th under the pretext of a ceremonial visit to commemorate a German military anniversary. Its flags flew from the masts. Its crew stood on deck in white dress uniforms. Hidden below were 225 Marines preparing for assault. Hitler had actually ordered the attack postponed on August 26th, one day after the ship arrived, when he learned that Britain and Poland had signed a mutual defense pact and that Italy was wavering on its commitments. The Schleswig-Holstein sat in Danzig harbor for 6 more days, its ceremonial presence concealing its purpose, its crew visible on deck, doing nothing. At 4:45 on September 1st, the ship moved to its firing position. The first shell struck the Polish ammunition depot at Westerplatte. Major Sucharski radioed his command. The 210 Polish soldiers inside the fortified peninsula, a force that had been quietly reinforced over the previous weeks by men smuggled in disguised as civilians, prepared to fight. German commanders expected Westerplatte to fall in 10 minutes. The garrison was 1 company. The attackers were more than 3,000 strong, including assault marines, infantry, and Danzig police, backed by the guns of the Schleswig-Holstein and a destroyer. In military terms, it should have been over before breakfast. Westerplatte held for 7 days. The garrison used prepared defensive positions, dense undergrowth, and the simple fact that the terrain funneled attackers into kill zones. The Germans lost 50 killed and 150 wounded, assaulting a position held by fewer than 250 men. When the Polish garrison finally surrendered on September 7th, having exhausted their ammunition and food, the German commander was so struck by what they had done that he allowed Major Sucharski to keep his ceremonial sword. As the surviving Polish soldiers marched out in formation, the German troops around them stood at attention. Across Poland that same morning, September 1st, 1.5 million German soldiers had crossed the border simultaneously from 3 directions. Army Group South drove through Silesia toward Warsaw. Army Group North ground forward from Pomerania and East Prussia, its engineers already moving toward the Vistula to begin bridging operations where the Dirschau span had been. A third axis struck from Slovakia in the south. The Polish army was outgunned. It was outnumbered. It was caught in a 3-way pincer that had been designed specifically to prevent any coherent defensive response. But it did not collapse. The story that Polish cavalry charged German tanks with sabers is fiction, Nazi propaganda, invented to make Polish resistance look primitive and futile. The reality was different. At the Battle of Mokra on September 1st, Polish cavalry units used anti-tank guns, rifles, and coordinated fire to destroy over 100 German armored vehicles in a single engagement. At Warsaw, 140,000 Polish soldiers held the capital against 175,000 Germans armed with 1,000 artillery pieces and 1,000 aircraft, repelling 3 major assaults before the city was finally crushed under 560 tons of bombs dropped in a single day. On September 3rd, 2 days after the invasion began, Britain and France declared war on Germany. World War II had officially started, the war that Ribbentrop had assured Hitler that Britain and France would never actually fight. On September 17th, the Soviet Union, secretly bound to Germany by the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, signed just 10 days before the invasion, crossed Poland's eastern border. Poland was now fighting Germany from the west and the Soviet Union from the east simultaneously. The last organized Polish resistance collapsed on October 6, 1939. Poland was partitioned between the 2 powers that had agreed in secret to destroy it. By the end of the Polish campaign, Germany had suffered 14,000 dead and 30,000 wounded. Poland had lost 66,000 dead, 130,000 wounded, and 400,000 captured, and that was only the beginning. The campaign that lasted 35 days was simply the opening chapter of a war that would not end for nearly 6 years. After Poland fell, Germany rebuilt the Dirschau Bridge. The reconstruction took 11 months and was completed in August 1940. A presentation album documenting the engineering work, photographs, diagrams, progress reports, was prepared as a gift and delivered to Adolf Hitler. That album still exists. It is preserved today in the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., a commemorative record of reconstruction presented to the man who had started a war to capture a bridge, failed to capture it, and then conquered the entire country anyway. Danzig, the city that was supposedly the whole point of the crisis, the wound at the center of 20 years of German grievance, was annexed by Germany on the first morning of the war. Its Jewish community, which had been systematically persecuted by the local Nazi party throughout the 1930s, was now fully exposed to the machinery of the Reich. Most did not survive. The Polish officer who stopped the freight train, who looked at the transit papers and found something that did not add up, who bought 15 minutes with a question, was never identified. History did not record his name. He likely died in the war, like so many millions of others. His 15 minutes changed nothing about the outcome. The bridge fell and Germany built another. The war came regardless. 50 million people died across 6 years and 6 continents. But that morning, in the dark, on a railway platform in the Polish corridor, before the bombs fell and before the shells hit and before the world understood what was beginning, one man looked at something that seemed wrong and decided it was worth asking about. He asked. He waited for an answer. And in the 4 minutes between the bridge falling and the guns opening up at Westerplatte, the first military operation of the most destructive war in human history failed because of him. Today, Danzig is the Polish city of Gdansk. At Westerplatte, on the peninsula where the opening shots were fired, a monument stands commemorating the 210 soldiers who held for 7 days when every calculation said 10 minutes. The fortress that stood there has been partially preserved. The crumbling concrete, the shell marks in the walls, the undergrowth that swallowed the defensive positions, it is all still there. The Treaty Bridge still stands as well, rebuilt, repaired, still carrying trains across the Vistula River, still 837 meters long. What a single bridge on a railway line in a Polish corridor town says about how the world goes to war is this: the wars do not start with battles. They start with maps and grievances and men who decide that a strip of land is worth more than the people who will die for it. The battles are just what happens after the decision has already been made. The bridge at Dirschau was the moment the decision became irreversible. One man with 15 minutes was not enough to stop it. Nothing was.